He thought embarrassing her would be easy, but in less than 10 seconds, his entire dojo would fall into a silence no one would ever forget. The afternoon sun poured through the tall glass windows of ironclad Jiu-Jitsu Academy in San Diego, casting long golden lines across the polished mats as students moved with practiced precision. The soft rhythm of feet sliding and uniforms shifting filling the air, and at the center of it all stood Brad Hoffman, a black belt instructor known not just for his skill, but for the quiet authority that made people listen before he even spoke. His arms folded as he observed the class with a sharp, measuring gaze, the kind that separated beginners from serious practitioners in seconds. And that was exactly the gaze that landed on Amanda Carter the moment she stepped through the door, her presence almost unnoticeable at first, dressed in a simple gray training GI that looked slightly worn at the edges, her hair tied back in a low, practical knot. Nothing flashy, nothing that demanded attention. Just a quiet woman entering a room that thrived on dominance and display. And yet something about her stillness felt out of place in a space built on controlled aggression, though no one could quite explain why. Not yet. Brad's eyes lingered a moment longer than necessary before a faint smirk touched the corner of his mouth, the kind that didn't need words to communicate judgment. And around him, a few of the more experienced students followed his gaze, their expressions shifting almost in sync, curiosity first, then amusement, then dismissal, because in a place like this, appearances spoke louder than introductions. And Amanda didn't look like someone who belonged among fighters. She looked like someone who had wandered into the wrong room. And that assumption spread quickly, quietly, like a ripple no one bothered to stop. Amanda stepped onto the mat with calm, deliberate movements, her posture relaxed, her eyes steady but unassuming. She didn't scan the room the way newcomers often did, didn't fidget or hesitate. She simply adjusted her sleeves and waited, as if she had all the time in the world, which only made the contrast sharper. Because around her, energy buzzed with competitiveness, with ego, with the constant need to prove something. Brad finally broke the silence with a low chuckle that carried just enough for those nearby to hear. "Beginner class is on Tuesdays," he said, his tone light, but edged with something colder beneath. A few students laughed under their breath, not loudly, not cruelly, just enough to signal alignment, to reinforce the invisible hierarchy that everyone understood without needing it explained. Amanda turned her head slightly toward him, her expression unchanged, no embarrassment, no defensiveness, just acknowledgement, as if she had heard variations of that sentence more times than anyone in the room could imagine. Brad took a step closer, now fully engaging, sensing an easy moment to entertain his class. "You sure you're in the right place?" he added, tilting his head, his voice carrying across the mat now, drawing more attention, more eyes, the room subtly shifting to watch, to anticipate what came next, because moments like this were part of the culture here, tests disguised as jokes, and Amanda stood there quietly in the center of it, surrounded by expectation, by doubt, by the quiet certainty that she would either fold or confirm exactly what they already believed. And for a brief second, the room held its breath without realizing it, waiting for her to respond, waiting for her to prove them right. Brad let the moment stretch just long enough for the room to settle into its expectation, his smirk widening slightly as Amanda remained still, her silence almost misread as uncertainty. And that was all he needed, because in his world hesitation meant weakness, and weakness was something he had built his reputation on exposing. He turned slightly toward the rest of the class, raising his voice just enough to carry across the mat. "We are working advanced transitions today," he said, pacing slowly as if narrating a lesson. Not exactly beginner-friendly. A few students chuckled again, more confidently now, encouraged by the tone he set, and one of the younger men near the edge of the mat crossed his arms, watching Amanda with open skepticism, while another whispered something that drew a quiet laugh. Amanda heard it. Of course she did. But her expression did not change. She simply shifted her weight slightly from one foot to the other, grounding herself, breathing steady, as if the noise around her existed somewhere far in the distance. Brad stopped pacing and faced her fully again, now clearly committed to turning this into a demonstration. "Tell you what," he said, clapping his hands once as if sealing the idea. "Let us see where you are at." His tone carried that same polished confidence that had impressed hundreds of students before her. But beneath it was something sharper, something that wanted to prove a point, not just teach one. He glanced over his shoulder and nodded toward a tall student standing near the center. "Ethan," he called, "come here." The man stepped forward immediately, a black belt wrapped neatly around his waist, his posture upright, controlled, the kind of presence that signaled experience without needing explanation. Ethan gave Amanda a brief nod, respectful but distant, already assuming the outcome, because to him this was routine, a quick match, a quick lesson, nothing more. Brad gestured toward the open space on the mat. "Light sparring," he added casually, though his eyes remained fixed on Amanda, watching for any sign of hesitation. Nothing too intense. Another ripple of quiet laughter moved through the group, the words "light sparring" hanging in the air like a polite disguise for what everyone knew this really was, a test she was not expected to pass. Amanda glanced briefly at Ethan, then back at Brad, her gaze steady, unbothered, and for the first time something in Brad's expression flickered, just for a fraction of a second, because there was no nervous smile, no awkward shifting, no attempt to back out, just calm acceptance. "If you are not comfortable," Brad added, almost as an afterthought, though his tone suggested the opposite. "You can always sit this one out." He expected relief, an easy exit, a confirmation of his assumption, but Amanda simply gave a small nod and stepped forward onto the center of the mat, her movements smooth, deliberate, as if she had done this countless times before, though no one in the room noticed that detail yet. The circle around them tightened slightly as students adjusted their positions, forming a loose ring of anticipation, the energy shifting from casual amusement to something more focused, more curious, because now there was a moment to watch, a moment to judge, and Brad folded his arms again, satisfied, convinced he was about to demonstrate exactly what belonged in his dojo and what did not. But as Amanda settled into position, her posture relaxed yet balanced, her breathing slow and controlled, there was a stillness around her that did not match the narrative anyone had already decided for her. And without realizing it, the room grew quieter, just enough for that difference to begin to matter. For a brief moment, nothing moved. Not Ethan, not Brad, not even the students surrounding the mat. As if the entire room had unconsciously agreed to pause before what they expected to be a quick and predictable outcome. Ethan adjusted his stance with the ease of someone who had done this hundreds of times, his movements precise and efficient, his focus already calculated. He gave Amanda a polite nod again, the kind reserved for someone he did not consider a threat, while Amanda simply mirrored the gesture with quiet respect, her eyes steady, her breathing slow, her shoulders relaxed in a way that did not match the tension in the room. Brad stepped slightly to the side, giving them space, his arms crossed, his expression confident, almost amused, as if he were about to watch a lesson unfold exactly as planned. "Begin," he said, his voice calm but carrying authority, and the moment the word left his mouth, Ethan moved first, not aggressively, not forcefully, but with controlled intent, testing distance, reading her balance, expecting hesitation, expecting uncertainty, expecting the small tells that beginners always gave away within seconds. But Amanda did not retreat. She did not rush. She did not overreact. She simply shifted, a subtle adjustment, almost invisible to the untrained eye, her foot sliding an inch, her weight redistributing with quiet precision. And that was the first moment something changed, not in action, but in perception, because Ethan noticed it, just for a fraction of a second. His movement paused ever so slightly, a hesitation so small no one else could see it. But to him it meant something was not aligning with expectation. He stepped again, this time a bit more deliberate, attempting to guide the exchange, but Amanda responded with equal calm, her hands moving just enough to redirect without force, without strain, as if she were following a rhythm only she could. Here, the students watching began to lean in, their earlier amusement fading into curiosity, because this was already lasting longer than anticipated, and there was no sign of panic. No sign of imbalance, no sign of someone out of place. Brad's smirk softened, not disappearing, but tightening slightly as he watched more closely now, his eyes narrowing, trying to identify what exactly he was seeing. Ethan circled, adjusting his approach, now more focused, his respect beginning to replace assumption. Though he did not fully understand why yet, Amanda remained centered, her movements minimal, efficient, almost effortless, as if she were conserving energy rather than reacting to pressure. And in that quiet exchange, something deeper was unfolding. Not a clash, not a struggle, but a conversation of control and awareness that most of the room was witnessing without fully comprehending. The air felt different now, heavier, more attentive, the soft sounds of movement against the mat becoming the only noise that mattered. And then it happened, not with speed that startled, but with timing so precise it seemed inevitable. Amanda shifted once more, a single fluid motion, her positioning aligning perfectly as Ethan committed just slightly too far. And in that instant, the dynamic changed completely, his balance compromised not by force, but by precision. His movement redirected into a position he did not intend, and before anyone could process it, before Brad could even adjust his stance, Ethan stopped, his expression shifting from focus to realization, his hand tapping lightly against the mat in acknowledgement, a signal understood instantly by anyone who trained there. The match was over, and for a heartbeat, no one reacted, no one spoke, no one even moved, because what they had just seen did not match the story they had already written in their minds. And as Amanda released calmly and stepped back, her expression unchanged, her breathing steady, the room fell into a silence that carried far more weight than any words ever could. No one clapped, no one spoke, and for several long seconds the only sound in the entire dojo was the faint hum of the overhead lights. As if even the building itself needed time to process what had just happened, Ethan remained where he was, still kneeling slightly, his hand resting on the mat where he had tapped, his eyes fixed on Amanda not with embarrassment, but with something far rarer in that room, recognition. He exhaled slowly and nodded once, more firmly this time, a silent acknowledgement that carried far more respect than any words he could have offered. Amanda returned the nod just as simply, then stepped back into a neutral stance, her posture relaxed as if nothing unusual had occurred, as if the moment that had just unfolded had been entirely expected, and that calm only made the silence around her heavier. Brad did not move at first, his arms still crossed, but the expression on his face had shifted. The confidence was still there, but now it was mixed with something sharper, something unsettled, because what he had witnessed did not fit into the categories he was used to controlling. He uncrossed his arms slowly and took a step forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied Amanda more carefully. Not her clothing, not her belt, but her stance, her balance, the way she held herself without effort. And for the first time since she walked in, he was not looking at her to judge. He was looking at her to understand. "Where did you train?" he asked, his voice lower now, stripped of its earlier edge. The room leaned in again, not out of amusement this time, but out of genuine curiosity, because the question carried weight. It acknowledged that something had been missed. Amanda paused for a brief moment before answering, not out of hesitation, but as if deciding how much to reveal. "Different places," she said, quietly, her tone even, offering nothing more than necessary. A few students exchanged glances, confused by the simplicity of the answer, expecting a name, a famous academy, a lineage that could explain what they had just seen. But there was none, just a quiet statement that gave them nothing to anchor their assumptions to. Brad held her gaze for a second longer, then gave a short nod, though it was clear he was not satisfied. Not because he doubted her, but because he realized he had underestimated something he could not immediately define. He turned slightly toward Ethan. "Again," he said, but this time the word carried a different tone, not a setup for humiliation, but a genuine request for confirmation. Ethan rose to his feet without hesitation, adjusting his GI with a calm that mirrored Amanda's, his earlier confidence now replaced with focus, the kind that came from knowing the next moment mattered more than the first. The circle around them tightened once more, but the energy had changed completely. No one was laughing now, no one was whispering. Every eye was fixed on the center of the mat, watching not for entertainment, but for understanding. Amanda stepped forward again, her movements unchanged, steady, grounded, her expression neutral. But there was a subtle shift in the way she carried herself now. Not more aggressive, not more defensive, just present in a way that made the space around her feel smaller, more controlled. Brad watched closely, his earlier assumptions dissolving with each second, because he could see it now, not just skill, but experience, not just technique, but mastery shaped over time. And as he opened his mouth to speak again, to give instruction, to reassert control over the room he had always led so easily, he stopped, because for the first time that day, he realized he was no longer the one setting the tone, and the room, still silent, was waiting to see what Amanda would do next. The second round began without announcement, without theatrics, just a quiet shift in posture as Ethan stepped forward again, this time slower, more deliberate, his eyes locked onto Amanda with a focus that replaced every trace of earlier assumption. The room felt tighter now, as if the walls had moved in closer, the students no longer standing casually but leaning forward, attentive, aware that what they were witnessing was no longer a demonstration, but something far more revealing. Amanda met Ethan's movement with the same calm precision, her stance unchanged, her breathing steady. But there was a subtle difference now, not in her technique, but in the way the space around her seemed to respond, as if she was no longer adapting to the environment but quietly shaping it. Ethan circled once, testing distance again. But this time there was no underestimation in his approach. Every step measured, every movement intentional. He reached forward carefully, initiating contact with controlled timing. But Amanda responded instantly, not with force, not with resistance, but with alignment, her hands guiding the interaction rather than opposing it. And in that moment it became clear to anyone paying attention that she was not reacting. She was anticipating, reading his movement before it fully formed. The exchange lasted only seconds, but within those seconds there was a complexity that most of the room could not fully grasp, a sequence of balance, timing, and awareness that unfolded too quickly to dissect, yet too cleanly to ignore. Ethan adjusted, attempting to regain control, but Amanda shifted seamlessly, her positioning always one step ahead, always exactly where it needed to be, and then just as before, without any sudden force or dramatic motion. The moment resolved, Ethan stopped again, his posture yielding not from pressure, but from realization, his hand tapping the mat once more, quieter this time, almost instinctive, and the silence that followed was deeper than before, because now it was no longer surprise, it was understanding. Brad exhaled slowly, a sound that carried more weight than any command he had given all day. His eyes fixed on Amanda, as if trying to recalibrate everything he thought he knew about the space he controlled. The students looked at one another, not speaking, but sharing the same unspoken thought, that what they had witnessed twice in a row was not coincidence, not luck, but something far beyond the surface-level judgments they had made only minutes ago. Ethan stood again, this time offering a small, genuine smile, not out of politeness, but respect earned in the only way that mattered in that room. Amanda returned it just as simply, her demeanor unchanged, still quiet, still grounded, as if none of this required acknowledgement. Brad stepped forward once more, but now there was no trace of the earlier mockery in his posture, no casual superiority, just a measured seriousness. That was not beginner level, he said, his voice steady, almost careful, and Amanda met his gaze without challenge, without pride, just calm presence. No, she replied softly, and in that single word there was no explanation, no justification, just truth, the kind that did not need to be defended. And for the first time since she had walked through the door, no one in the room questioned where she belonged, because the answer had already been made clear without her ever needing to say it. Brad did not speak immediately, and that alone shifted something deeper in the room than any command ever could, because silence from him was rare, deliberate, and now it carried weight. His eyes remained on Amanda, not with skepticism anymore, but with a quiet calculation that came from recognizing something he had not anticipated, something that did not fit neatly into his hierarchy. He took a slow step closer, not to challenge, but to observe, as if proximity might reveal what distance had hidden. "You have trained for a long time," he said finally, not as a question, but as a statement he was still trying to confirm for himself. Amanda tilted her head slightly, considering the words, then gave a small nod. "Long enough," she replied, her voice calm, unembellished, offering no details beyond what was necessary. And again, that simplicity unsettled the expectations in the room, because people there were used to stories, to credentials, to names that carried recognition, but Amanda gave none of that. She stood there without explanation, without display, and yet everything she had done spoke louder than anything she could have said. One of the students near the edge of the mat shifted forward, unable to hold back any longer. "Where?" he asked, the words slipping out before he could stop himself. Curiosity overriding etiquette, Amanda glanced toward him briefly, her expression neutral, then looked back at Brad. "Different places," she repeated, the same answer, unchanged, and this time it landed differently, not as avoidance, but as something intentional, something that suggested her journey was not meant to be summarized in a single name or location. Brad exhaled. Again, slower this time, processing, recalibrating. The structure he relied on was built on clear categories: beginner, intermediate, advanced. But Amanda did not sit cleanly in any of them. She existed outside of the labels he used to define everyone else in that room. And that realization forced a shift not just in his perception of her, but in his understanding of the moment itself. He turned slightly, scanning the class, noticing the change in their posture, the absence of laughter, the quiet attention that had replaced it. They were not looking at Amanda the same way anymore. And that meant something fundamental had shifted in the culture of the room in a matter of minutes. Brad nodded once, as if accepting something internally, then stepped back, giving Amanda space again. But this time the gesture was different. It was not dismissal, it was acknowledgement. "You came in quiet," he said, his voice steady, carrying across the mat without force. "Most people do not notice quiet." He paused briefly, his gaze sweeping the students before returning to her. "Until it changes everything." No one responded, no one interrupted, because the truth in that statement was already visible. Amanda did not react to the words, did not accept them as praise or correction. She simply stood there as she had from the beginning, grounded, composed, unchanged. And that consistency spoke louder than any reaction could have. Ethan stepped slightly to the side, still watching her, but now with a different kind of attention, not evaluation, but respect that had already been earned. The students around the mat remained still, absorbing the moment, because what they had witnessed was not just skill, it was a lesson delivered without intention, without announcement, without any need for validation. And as the silence settled once more, it carried a different feeling now, not tension, not anticipation, but clarity, the kind that stays long after the moment itself has passed. The room did not return to normal, not right away, because something invisible had shifted and no one seemed willing to break it. The usual rhythm of training, the casual chatter, the background movement, all of it remained suspended as if the space itself was recalibrating around a new understanding. Brad glanced briefly toward the clock on the wall, then back at Amanda, but this time there was no urgency in his movements. No need to regain control through instruction. Instead, he seemed to be choosing his next action carefully, aware that whatever came next would define how this moment settled into memory. "Pair up," he said finally, his voice even, controlled, but quieter than before, and the class responded almost automatically, though their movements were slower, more thoughtful, eyes still drifting back toward Amanda as they found partners, as if they did not want to miss whatever might happen next. Ethan stepped aside, adjusting his belt, but he did not walk far. His attention remained close, while Amanda moved toward the edge of the mat, giving space to others without drawing attention to herself, her presence returning to that same quiet baseline she had carried from the moment she entered. And that contrast only made what had happened moments ago feel even more striking. One of the newer students hesitated before approaching her, a young woman who had earlier watched in silence, unsure, almost cautious. "Would you like to train?" she asked, her voice soft, respectful, completely different from the tone that had filled the room earlier. Amanda nodded gently. "Of course," she replied, her tone unchanged, welcoming but reserved. And as they began to move through basic drills, the difference became immediately clear, not in dominance, not in control, but in guidance. Amanda adjusted her partner's positioning with small, precise corrections, never forcing, never overwhelming, just showing, allowing the other woman to feel the movement rather than struggle against it. And that was when another realization began to spread through the room, quieter than before, but just as powerful. Because what Amanda displayed was not just skill in execution, but understanding and teaching, a level of awareness that extended beyond herself. Brad noticed it too. His arms no longer crossed, his posture relaxed, watching not as an authority, but as someone learning something unexpected in his own space. He walked slowly along the edge of the mat, observing different pairs, but his attention kept returning to Amanda, to the way her partner's movements improved within seconds, to the way confusion turned into clarity without a single raised voice or exaggerated instruction. And for a moment, Brad stopped completely, standing still as he watched her demonstrate a simple transition, her movements fluid, patient, almost effortless, the kind of precision that could not be faked or improvised. It had to be earned over time. And that was when the final piece settled into place for him. Not just that she was skilled, not just that she was experienced, but that she carried a depth that could not be measured by rank alone. The students nearby began to notice as well, subtle shifts in posture, in attention, in the way they listened when she spoke quietly, the earlier hierarchy dissolving into something more balanced, more aware, and without any announcement, without any declaration. Amanda had become the center of the room in the most understated way possible, not by demanding it, not by claiming it, but by simply being exactly who she was. And in that quiet presence, the lesson continued, not through words, but through every movement she made. By the time the session began to wind down, the energy in the dojo no longer resembled what it had been just an hour earlier. The sharp edges of ego and quiet judgment had softened into something far more attentive, far more grounded. And it was not because anyone had been told to change. It was because they had witnessed something they could not ignore. Brad stood near the center of the mat, watching the class move through their final drills. But his usual rhythm of correction and instruction had slowed. His voice used less, his presence quieter, as if he understood that the most important lesson of the day had already been delivered without him. His gaze shifted once more toward Amanda, who was now helping her partner refine a small detail in positioning. Her movements still precise, still calm, her voice low, offering guidance that felt more like an invitation than a command, and the student nodded, adjusting, improving within seconds, a transformation that did not require repetition or force, just understanding. And that was when Brad stepped forward, not abruptly, not with authority, but with intention. The class gradually slowed, sensing the shift, and one by one, the pair stopped, turning their attention toward him, the room settling into a quiet that felt different now, not tense, not expectant, but open. "Everyone gather in," Brad said, his tone steady, but noticeably different from earlier, softer, more measured, and the students formed a loose circle around him, Amanda included, though she remained slightly to the side, as if still choosing not to occupy the center even when it naturally moved toward her. Brad looked around the group, his eyes passing over each face, taking in the change that had unfolded in such a short time. "What you saw today," he began, pausing briefly, as if selecting his words carefully, "was not about winning or losing." His gaze shifted toward Amanda for a moment, then back to the group. It was about understanding. No one spoke, no one interrupted, because the weight of what he was saying was already supported by what they had experienced. Skill is not always loud, he continued, his voice even, and it does not always look the way you expect. A few students lowered their eyes slightly, not out of shame, but reflection, recognizing their own earlier assumptions in the silence. Brad exhaled slowly, then added, "If you judge too quickly, you will miss what matters most." The words settled into the room without resistance, because they were no longer abstract. They were real, visible, undeniable. Amanda remained still, listening but not reacting, as if the message was not directed at her, even though she had been the one who made it possible. Ethan stood nearby, his posture relaxed, but attentive, his earlier confidence now replaced with something steadier, something earned. And as the moment lingered, Brad gave a small nod, not to the group, but toward Amanda, subtle, almost unnoticeable, but clear in its meaning. An acknowledgement that did not need to be spoken aloud, and Amanda returned it just as quietly, the exchange, lasting less than a second, yet carrying more weight than anything that had been said. and as the class began to disperse, the usual sounds slowly returning, there was one thing that remained unchanged: the way every person in that room now looked at her, not with curiosity, not with doubt, but with a respect that had been built in silence and would not be forgotten. The last few students filtered out slowly, their voices quieter than usual as they gathered their things, glancing back one more time as if they wanted to hold on to the moment just a little longer. The late afternoon light now stretching deeper across the mats, softening the sharp edges of the room that had once felt so rigid. Amanda moved toward the bench near the wall, untying the knot of her training belt with calm, practiced hands. Her movements unhurried, unaffected, as though the entire experience had simply been another part of her day, not something worth lingering on. Ethan approached first, stopping a respectful distance away. "Thank you," he said, his voice genuine. Without hesitation, Amanda looked up and gave a small nod. "You adjusted quickly," she replied, her tone quiet but sincere, and Ethan smiled slightly, understanding that the comment carried more meaning than it appeared. He nodded once more before stepping back, leaving her space, a gesture that reflected the respect that had replaced his earlier assumptions. Brad remained near the center of the mat, watching the room empty, his posture relaxed but thoughtful, as if replaying the sequence of events in his mind. And after a moment, he walked over, not with authority, not as an instructor addressing a student, but as someone seeking clarity. "You knew exactly what you were doing the moment you stepped in," he said, his voice steady, not accusatory, not impressed, just honest. Amanda paused briefly, then tied her belt loosely in her hands, considering the statement. "I knew what I needed to see," she answered, her words simple, but layered in a way that required reflection. Brad studied her for a second longer, then gave a small nod, accepting the answer even if he did not fully understand it. "You are welcome here," he said after a pause, the words carrying a sincerity that had not been present earlier, not as permission, but as recognition. Amanda met his gaze, her expression unchanged, then nodded once. "Thank you," she replied, and there was no tension in the exchange, no lingering imbalance, just a quiet understanding that had settled naturally between them. Brad stepped back, allowing the moment to close without forcing anything further. And as Amanda picked up her bag and moved toward the door, the room felt different in her absence already, as if something she carried with her had briefly reshaped the space and then left just as quietly. The door opened, the warm California air drifting in for a moment before she stepped outside, and for a brief second, Brad stood still, looking toward the empty doorway, then exhaled slowly, turning back toward the mats, the echo of the day still present in the silence. And though no one said it out loud, everyone who had been there would remember, not the moment she proved them wrong, but the moment they realized they had been wrong to begin with, and that understanding stayed long after she was gone, settling into the room like something permanent, something that would not be easily forgotten, because that day, without raising her voice, without demanding attention, she had shown them exactly what quiet strength looks like.